Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the Servoy Tech webinar. My name is Jan Heyleman. I'm the founder of Servoy, and I'm joined by Sean Devlin, who has been presenting this webinars for quite some time now. Welcome, Sean.
Good morning, Jan.
And everybody, let's get ready with your favorite drink of the day, in my case, an espresso, and get ready for webinar number 56. Quite a few have been done already. There was a popular request on the forum that said, can we also number them, because we often refer to them. So we've started, as of the previous one, numbering them. And hopefully you find some time to catch up on the previous ones as well, to go back and give them all a number, so you can easily find other webinars when we refer to them. If you have any questions during this session, feel free to post them in the questions channel. We're here to answer any of your questions. If you have questions after this webinar, the forum is the right place to go. And again, before we start, Servoy World 2019, quite a few people have already subscribed. If you want to go, then now is the time. I think the early bird is ending in a week or so. Is that right, John?
Yeah, it's valid until the end of the month.
Okay, so make sure to get it before the end of the month. Also, the hotel, we understood, is starting to fill up. So if you want to be in the main conference hotel, then don't forget to book this next week. Or otherwise, obviously, there are hundreds of hotels in Amsterdam or Airbnbs. If that's what you prefer, then you can do that as well. All right, with that out of our way, let's get started, Sean.
Okay, small typo. We're not doing the NG grids here. We did that last week. So this is number 56. We did over the past few weeks some updates regarding the Q1 or the 2019.3 launch. We're kind of past all that now, but there's still, because that consumed so much bandwidth, there's a lot of things that sit around, either finished but not announced, or 90% finished but not released. So with the Q1 build out of the way, it gave us a bit of breathing space to go through and clean up and prepare some things to be released. So today I'm happy to announce that we released just this morning the Gmaps update. So this is the Gmaps package, which allows you to do geocoding and mapping in a Servoy application very easily. And we announced version 2.0 today. And I'm going to show you what's new in that, because it's been a while since that extension has been released. So as is the tradition, we'll start with demos, and then if we have time, we'll do some overview and slides and take some questions. Today's demo should be pretty brief, just a few things that we want to show you that we've added, and talk a bit about what could be coming in the future. So the first demo, I'm going to show how to do a data-bound map that's without any code, and for showing a single marker in a map. This is something you could already do, but just in case you are exploring Servoy for the first time or the NG client for the first time, it's nice to know that this feature is there. After that, we'll show how to do multi-marker maps, so you can put many records on a map, and there's also some options for clustering and geocoding in that as well. And finally, we'll have an example that shows some route mapping. So let's get into it. We're looking at an application that has a single map on it, but actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the IDE and just relaunch this, because I want to show one thing in how to get started. You'll notice that when this first loads, it's asking me for a Google Maps key. So I programmed in a little dialog to ask for that, because in order to use any of the parts of the Gmaps web package, one needs to obtain an API key from Google. It's free. You just have to go into your account or created account and ask for an API key, and then it starts to track your usage of the API. So I have already in my clipboard my API key. It looks something like a big long string of letters. And now I'm into the application. So I've stored that in a session variable, and I will use that in the different examples. So the first example, as I said, is the single marker data bound. There's no code here, but you'll notice that there's a nice looking map on the screen. There are some options available in the map, so you can see that there's the satellite option or the terrain option. We can zoom in and out. There's the option for the little street view guy if you want to get in and look around. How do I get out of this now? And of course, you can click and drag and do everything you can do in a normal map. We also have full screen mode, and all of these controls you can turn on and off with configuration, and I'll show that. One thing that I think is worth pointing out is that this is data bound. So as I scroll through records, you can see that the map is updated to reflect the selected address. There's no code required for that. That's happening automatically. Also, if I were to come in and change, say, the address and move this to say Paris, then you can see the marker has moved. So, and I'll put it back, and once again it moves. Again, there's no code required for that because this map is part of Servoy's data binding layer. All of those things happen automatically, and that's something that you get throughout an application is data binding and pushes to the browser. So that's the real simple example. This was available in the 1.0 release of the Gmaps web package, but I think it's worth pointing that out in case this is brand new. Now we get into the stuff that's available that was released today. So the next example I want to show is multiple markers. So you can see that when I click on the map here, I have a list of records, and I'm going to do a small search here using the SVY search library, which was demoed in a webinar long ago, but I'll just put in something like France. And you can see now that the map renders with all of the markers for France, and you'll also notice that these are clustered. So because there are many orders here shipped to France, and many of them actually go to the same location or even nearby locations, this is a feature of the map that whenever you have markers where the density is high, rather than showing a bunch of overlaid pins, it will cluster them and then show you the number in that cluster. So then if you actually mouse over and say click on one of these, it will zoom in and show you further the clustering. Some cases it'll go right to the pins. In this case, there's actually clustering at two places, and I'm pretty sure these are the same address. So if I click on one of these, it's going to zoom way in and give me the 4 points there. So so that's a pretty cool feature. And if I change my search, say put in USA, again, quickly we get all of the markers, orders that are shipped to the USA, rendered on the map and clustered. You'll also notice that automatically the extent of the map is zoomed to contain the points. So it's not like you have to also programmatically move the map. It does that automatically for you as you push markers into the map. The final example that I want to show is the route mapping. So I'm going to go here to the third example. We have a few here that didn't have locations. So we have to go somewhere that has a real address. I believe if we go probably back one record, get something. Let's go to, I'm just going to find a, these are all of the orders in the database. I was going to go to the first record because I thought that we had something with a real address. Let's try this. Help. There we go. So in this case, I have 2 points on the map. I have the ship address of the order, and I have hard-coded in this case, Servoy headquarters in Amsterdam, and it's going to render the route for me. If I were to go to another record, now you can see that, again, this is data bound, so the address here updates with the record, but over here we've passed in the marker for Geneva, and it shows the route from Amsterdam to Geneva. I can switch back and it goes back to Amsterdam to Bern. So this is the third feature that was released in the 2.0 version of the GMaps package, the ability to do route mapping. So those are the demos, pretty quick. Why don't we go into the developer and take a look at how it is built. I have a bunch of things open because, as usual, I'm working up until the very last minute to prepare these. So let's take a look at the first form, which is the order detail form. This was the single marker data bound example that requires no code. For those of you who are fairly new to Servoy or the NG client, to get the maps web package, you right-click the web package icon here and you download install with the web package manager. And when it comes up, you select the GMaps package and it will install it, after which you'll get on your palette here the web package and the component. You drag the component on the form, and when you highlight the component, you get the properties. And the first thing I want to point out here is that you have to bind do anything if you don't have that. Again, I showed that little dialog, captured it, and stored it to a session variable, and I'm now binding it to that session variable. So I only have to do that once. There's no code involved after I sort of captured that. Of course, you could hard code it too for an application that only needs it once. There's many ways to do it. But here it's data bound to that. Then there's some sort of static configurations. You'll notice that I turned on all of the controls. So the zoom control, the full screen control, being able to switch from terrain to map to satellite, etc. Those are all options. You could turn those off and hide them if you want. You can also set a default zoom level. But the most important thing is the markers binding. So you can bind the map to one or more sources where it will get markers. In my case, I only wanted to use one. So I added one marker here, and I set the data provider to be the display address. That means that it's actually data bound to this is the calculation on the current record in this form's found set. I could also fill these out instead and just have a hard-coded value, but that isn't so useful for this example. Display address is not really a physical column in the database. It's derived from multiple columns. So it's a simple calculation which just smushes together all of the data providers that make up an address. Again, that's the data binding setup. Everything after that happens without any programming. So that's really all the steps you need to take, just a few seconds, a few clicks to be up and running with a single marker data bound map. In fact, this could be multi-marker. You could set up multiple marker providers here if you had a use case for that. So for example, if you had a from address and a to address, or you had a shipping and billing and you wanted to see both of them for some reason on a map, those can both be added, both be data bound, no code required. So that's the simple example. Let's jump into the next example, which showed those maps on with the search and the list and the clustering for doing multi-markers. So I have another form here called orders list. I'm going to open that in the form editor. And you can see that I have the map here on the form, and the setup is the same, except for I don't really add those markers. In this case, I'm doing it programmatically. So I want to go ahead and open this form in the script editor and show you what happens. So on search, I'm doing the search. This uses the SVY search library, which does some gives me some power to do some text-based searching. We cover that in another webinar. But after that, I'm calling, I don't know why this calls twice. Maybe that's why I was getting that dialog 2 times. I'm calling load markers lat long. So we'll go down and look at this method here. And this is where we talk to the map programmatically. So elements.map.use Google map cluster equals true. So this is just a property. You can see that I would get code complete on anything I could do for the map component. And it's just simply setting it to true. The next thing that I do is I make an empty array, and this is a bit of data trickery here in Servoy. I wouldn't worry too much if you don't get this part, but I take the current found set and I dump it out to a data set, which is sort of just an in-memory kind of array that I can traverse very quickly. I iterate over it, and I'm grabbing the latitude and the longitude columns out of the database table, and I'm making a marker programmatically, and I'm putting that into this array, and then at the very end I pass it into the map, and that's it. So somehow it could be the way that I've demonstrated here, or a different way. You want to create these marker objects. They're very simple. They either have an address string or latitude and longitude, and you can push those into the map. And you can mix and match too. If you have some which are these you would call geocoded, right? Because they actually have coordinates. So the example that I showed you was doing latitude and longitude. So these records have already been geocoded. Now, most people, if they have a database of orders or something with address data, they don't already have the luxury to have the addresses that are geocoded. So I have another sort of flavor of this method called load markers geocode, and this is how you could do this without passing in the latitude and longitude. Instead, it does the same thing. It queries the database and it makes this marker with an address string. The only difference is that the map will automatically geocode it for you. So the result would be the same. The downside is that Google applies rate limiting on the free versions of the API. So you have to sort of geocode a few and then wait, and then geocode a few and then wait. And we build in support to the component to do that so that it doesn't bomb out because you passed in 100 markers. And the rate limiting for the API is, the free API is kind of stingy. It will start to slow you down after just a few markers. I think it's like 10 a second or something. So so it's better to geocode those in advance, is what I'm showing here. So if you don't get any of the code you're seeing here, just know that you can pass in an address. It will be geocoded automatically, or you can pass in lat long, and it's already geocoded. I think it's worth showing you how I got these lat long, because they weren't already. This is just the example database, the Northwinds database that ships with Servoy for you to play with. I want to show you how I got the lat long, because that's sort of part of this whole ecosystem of mapping. I created a method called geocode orders, and basically I iterated over the found set, and I geocoded each individual address, and then I saved it to 2 new columns that I made. Looking at this, I actually use our HTTP plugin, and I just send web service requests to Google, and I do a little bit of sleeping when I hit the query limit. When we post the sample solution for this, we'll put the geocode address example here so you can see, and possibly we could enhance this offering with a helper module that does the server-side stuff if you need it. Because what I found is that I had a pretty slow rendering on the map just to show, you know, a dozen markers or more. There was a lag, and I didn't want to have that in my demo, so I thought, well, let me geocode everything before I try to render it, and then it just renders really snappy, and I can do all the. You saw that when I did the whole database, it didn't take that long, and everything was clustered, and you could see the whole world view. So I recommend this approach unless you just want to pay for the have the quotas lifted. You can also do that if you're going to do it heavy usage. So the final example that I showed was route mapping, where we could between records and show the directions. For that, I go to the final example, order details routing. I'll open this in the form editor. Really, this is a copy of the first order detail form. The only difference is, well, I really should just open in script editor. The only difference is that on record selection, I'm not using a data bound example here, by the way. I'm going to do this on record selection and handle it myself because I have to do a bit more through the API. But the form has an event every time you change the record. This gets called. I jump to this load route method. I put in my starting address, which I put for Servoy headquarters. Then I make two markers. One is the start address. The other one is the destination address, which is that calculation that I made to smush the address fields together. And again, this will come off the current record, so I just have to put that in. So I make those markers. I set this one flag here to enable map directions to equal true. And then I just push the markers in to the map, and then I'm done. You don't need to have exactly two markers. If you had 3 markers, it would show the route connecting 3 points, etc. So you can use 2 or more markers for that. But in this case, every time the record selection changes, I pass these in. So that's kind of the deep dive into the code, the 3 demos. What I can do is quickly go through a small overview, just in case you have a hard time digesting everything so quickly. So you get the key points, and then we'll take some questions. So the first example was the data bound maps. Again, if you want to go slow and simple, you just put the component on the form, you hook it up to the fields that provide the address data. Everything else happens without any code. If you edit the address, the map changes. If you go to a different record, the map changes. It's pretty simple, but it only shows one. Well, it can show more than one marker, but that's another story. The next example was the multi-marker map, and in this case, it was not just the design time; it was also the runtime setup. So I used the simple API to pass in those marker objects. Remember that you can do lat long, or you can do an address. If you do an address, then you can take advantage of the built-in geocoding. And then either way, the map will auto zoom to the extent of the marker set that you passed in. You have the option to turn clustering on. In my example, I had it turned on. In that case, when the map markers become very dense, it will sort of cluster them into a single marker and show you the number that are in that cluster. Clicking on them zooms into the cluster and spreads them out so you can see them again. If you do the built-in geocoding, that is, if you pass in the address, then you have to watch out for the API limits. They're pretty stingy with that. And I came into some performance problems pretty quickly. So we'll get to a minute about what to do about that. The third example was the route mapping, simple API, automatically render 2 or more markers. You just have to pass them in and turn that flag on. It's really one step before you put the markers in. Again, about the sort of the constraints here, you have to have that API key. It is free, but rate limits apply unless you pay. And one workaround to those rate limits is if you don't really need this stuff geocoded real time, then you can just geocode it when the record's created or geocode it in a batch, like on the server. Actually, 10 minutes before the webinar, I was trying to fix this, and I wrote that little routine to just geocode all the orders in my database and save it in advance. And I sort of front loaded all the performance problem into that method so that when I showed it to you, it renders quickly because I already have latitude and longitude. Okay, that's pretty much everything. I think we're done in time to take a few questions. Jan, what do we have?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions coming in. Nice demos, by the way. The first question is, but I think you covered this sort of with the rate limits. Juan about is this free to use, and I think that you answered it already. Yeah, so it is free unless you're sending a lot of data to it, then you'll need to limit it, or you can actually just pay for it. I mean, I looked at the rates that Google charges, and if you're using this in a commercial solution, then it's not very expensive to just get your rates unreleased as well. There's another question, Sean, coming in. Will this also work with Servoy 8.3?
Yeah, this should be compatible with Servoy 8.3. The example I showed uses the 2019 Q1 build, but the component itself doesn't have any dependencies on the latest version of Servoy. However, the example project that I did does some things from Servoy 8.4 and up, like CSS positioning. So the example is compatible to the latest Servoy, but the component itself should go back a few versions.
And you said this component is available already?
Yes, I wanted to make sure I didn't forget to show that. Here is the GitHub homepage. If you go to releases, you can see that we built a release this morning, and here's where you can, if you wanted to, you could download the source code and run from source, or download the package. But again, this plugs into Servoy, so you can download it through the IDE. But on the project site is also where you'll find wiki documentation. We have a bit of work to update the documentation with the latest release. So we'll get that up there really soon. But the release will have the sample that I just showed and the binaries. So those of you who are into Git can run it from source as well.
But if you're not, it's just in the package manager, right?
Yes, yeah. So right in the IDE, you can add it. You don't have to go to the GitHub page. You don't have to know anything about Git or anything like that. You just kind of click it and bring it into your project, and it just works.
Cool. And is the example you showed going to be available as well?
Yes. So I will attach the example to the release after the webinar because I was tweaking it up until the last minute. I never have the sample ready for you in advance of the webinar, but after the webinar, I'll attach it to the release page of GitHub, and I'll copy that link into the forum so you can get it. And I think I'm behind on one sample too from the ng-grid webinar last time as well. So we'll get to that real soon.
Okay, cool. Well, there are no further questions, so we're done in time today.
Fantastic.
So for those who haven't subscribed yet to Servoy World, now is the time to do so. And what's in 2 weeks, Sjan?
In 2 weeks, we're going to do more component updates like this, more extension updates. We have more things that we have to clean up and release and announce. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what it is. You have to stay tuned, but it will be along these lines, new stuff